We continue now top of Daf Nun Vav Amud Beis in Meseches Nedarim. This is Nedarim Daf 56b. And the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing what a dargish is and how a dargish is different than a regular mita, a regular bed. And Ula said that a dargish is an arsa degada, which means it is a bed of fortune. It's a bed of good fortune. They used to set up this bed in the house. They didn't use it for sleeping. It was just there for mazel. It was just there for fortune. And so the Gemara now asks, we have a brisa that says that by an ovel, he overturns all of the beds in the house, but he does not have to overturn the dargish. And so the Gemara says, why should that be the case? If the dargish is a bed of good fortune, so then just like any other bed, it should have to be overturned. And the Gemara now responds, that's not so difficult. Midi dahave amita hamiyuchedes lekelim. It's similar to what we find by a bed that is designated just to put kelim, just to put vessels on it. You don't sleep on it. That also does not have to be overturned. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, im haisa mita hamiyuchedes lekelim. If you have a bed that is designated for vessels, ein tzarech lechafosa. There's no need to overturn it. But the Gemara says, Eli kasha hakasha. But if there's any difficulty saying that a dargish is an arsa degada, saying that it is a bed of good fortune, the following brisa is difficult. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, dargish, when it comes to a dargish, matir karvita v'hu nofel me'elav. So what he does is, he undoes the straps, and then it falls on its own. And so the Gemara says, dargish arsa degadahu. Now, if the dargish is an arsa degada, is the bed of good fortune, karvitin mi islay, does it really have these straps that a regular bed has? And the Mefarish over here says, karvitin lulos shabo. Again, these are like the loops which the straps are in. Karvitin mi islay hachi kimlu delo haveluhu karvitin. It was established, it's known that this arsa degada doesn't have karvitin. She'ino asuya lisparak. It's not the kind of thing that's made to take apart. Elo medis mutzas liolim. It's always made as a made bed all the time. But the Gemara says, kasha ha-kasha, but if there's anything that's difficult of saying that a dargish is an arsa degada, the following brisa poses a difficulty. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, dargish, when it comes to dargish, matir karvitav, you can undo the loops, v'hu nofel me'elav, and it falls apart on its own. And so the Gemara says on this, v'i dargish arsa degadahu. Now, if you say that a dargish refers to an arsa degada, again, this bed of good fortune, so karvitin mi islay, does it even have these loops? And the Mefarish over here says, karvitin, again, lulos shabo, that refers to the loops that are normally on the bed frame. Karvitin mi islay hachi kimlu, this is just something that's known, the lo haveluhu karvitin, that a arsa degada did not have karvitin, she'ino asuya lisparak, because the arsa degada wasn't made to be taken apart. Elo medes mutzas lo'olim, it was something that was set up to be made all the time, and so therefore it cannot be that a dargish is the arsa degada. And so the Gemara says, Kiyasa Ravin Omar, when Ravin came, he said, She'ilte lahume Rabbonon, v'Rav Tachlifa bar Ma'arava Shmei. I asked one of the Rabbonon, and his name was Rav Tachlifa bar Ma'arava, Daveshchiach Beshuka Detzili. He was frequent in the shuk, in the marketplace where they sold the oros, they sold the hides. V'Omar li, and he said to me, my dargish, what is a dargish? Arsa Detzila. It refers to a bed that is like a leather bed. And the Mefarish over here explains, first the Mefarish has a slightly different girsa than we had in our Gemara. Reb Shimon Omer ein sarach lezogfa, that when it comes to the dargish, it said matir karvita, if you undo the loops and it falls apart. What the girsa is you don't need to stand it up. Elahu ha'avel notel karvita, and again, rather the avel takes off the loops, v'hino felas, and it falls. The tzili mochre oros, he was again by the marketplace of the tzili where they sold the hides. Arsa detzila, and what is this dargish? It's the arsa detzila. It's the bed that's made of these hides. Shal or sheyashin ala, again made of this leather that you sleep on it. Aval eina chashuva kolkach, it is not such an important item. Ulahachi hoel ve'eina chashuva, and therefore, since it's not considered an item of status, lo hayakofa, you didn't have to overturn it. Ela zogfa v'daya, it was enough just to stand it up. V'hilkach amrina v'masnizin, and that's why we also say in the Mishnah to mutter bedargish, that it's considered mutter by a dargish. If you make a neder from a mita, he's mutter to use a dargish. She'ina mita chashuva, because again, it's not considered a mita chashuva. It's not like an important kind of bed. And the Mefarish says further, v'arsa datzila isla karvita, and this arsa datzila does have these loops. Upaler Rav Shimon ben Gamliel b'Gemara, and that's what Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is arguing about in the Gemara. And he's saying, v'yamar, he says, deboy kfiyah, that you do need to overturn it. Kol kach shematir karvitin, you got to undo those loops. Va'or nofel me'elav, and then the leather falls on its own. L'fi sheyesh ritzuos saviv l'or, because there are these straps that surround the leather. Umoscheno so ben aruchos hamita, you pull them by the frame of the bed. V'koshen horitzu Suos Ba'aruchos, and you tie these straps on the Aruchos Hamita, again on the poles along the sides of the bed, V'shoch v'nalav, and then you lie upon the leather, Uchshematir and Haritzuos, Vor Nofel, and when you undo these straps and then the leather falls, Ein L'cha Kafiyah Gedola Mizu, there's no greater overturning than that counts as overturning the bed. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was said, Ezehu mita ve'ezehu dargish, what is a mita and what is a dargish? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Mita misargin osa al gava, when it comes to a bed, so we fasten the straps over the frame. But dargish misargin osa migufa, but by the dargish, they would fasten these straps within the frame itself, within holes of the frame. And the Gemara says, Meisve, we have the following question, Kliates, when it comes to these vessels made of wood, Me'emasai Mekabel and Tumah, when is it considered that they are finished Kli, and they're Mekabel Tumah, they can receive Tumah? Hamita v'harisa, when it comes to the beds, Mishiyeshufim ba'or, it's when you smooth out the wood of the frame, ba'or hadog, with the skin of a fish, they would smooth out the wood, and that's when it's considered finished. And so the Gemara now asks, V'im mita mistareges al gaba. Now, if it's true that when it comes to a bed, you actually put the straps over the frame, not within the frame, so lamali shifas or hadag. Why do you need to smooth out the wood with the skin of the fish? You don't need to smooth it out. It's being covered over anyway. So the Gemara says, you're right, Elohavaha migufan. Rather, it doesn't matter. Both by a dargish and by a mita, you're actually fastening the straps within the bed frame itself. But mita a'ule va'afuke bebezine, dargish a'ule va'afuke ba'avaksa. By the bed, the straps go through these holes that are within the frame. By the dargish, so the straps actually go through these loops that are attached to the frame. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Baracha, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Baracha says that Rebbe says, Mita shenaklita yotzin, let's say you have a bed which has these poles, they would put a canopy over the bed, so it's impossible to overturn that bed because of these poles. So in that situation, Zok Favadayo, it's enough just to stand it up on its side, and that is sufficient by a mourner. And the Gemara concludes, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Baridi, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yaakov Baridi says that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Halacha Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. The halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Again, that's Rav Shimon ben Gamliel before that said that if you undo the loops, that is sufficient to be considered overturning the bed. And the Mefarish explains, Mishi Yeshufim Ba'or Hadag, again, when it came to the bed and when it came to the crib, Hamita V'arisa, so then they're considered finished kalim when you smooth them out with the skin of the fish. And Meshavshei Fa'etzim Shal Mito Haruchos V'aketzaros, you take those wooden parts of the frame of the bed and you smooth them out. Ba'or Hadag, you use the skin of a fish to do that. Kedei La'asos and Tzuvim V'chalokim, so they'll be smooth and they will look nice. And then again, the Gemara said, Shenaklita Yotz, and let's say you have a bed which has these poles for the canopy. Kedamrin and Hasam Naklitin Shnayim. Naklitim, they used to have two posts in the middle of the bed, and they would put a canopy over. V'yosamita ein adam yachol lechafosi. You can't overturn that bed. Mipnei Naklita, because again, you have those posts. Elazokval beis margalosel manichavidah. You just stand it up on its side, and that is good enough. Halachik Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Again, the Gemara concluded the halach is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Damar matir karvit. And again, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said that if you undo the loops of the bed, that is sufficient to be considered overturning the bed. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hanoder min ho'ir, if a person takes a neder not to enter a particular city, mutter li kanes li techuma shalir, it's mutter to enter into the tchum of the city, v'asr li kanes li ibura, however, it is asr to enter into the outskirts of the city, the ibura shalir is considered part of the city. The Mefarish over here explains, L'tchuma besoch alpayim amma, the tchum of a city is 2,000 amos surrounding the city, that's called the tchum, that is not considered part of the person's neder, it's not considered part of the city. L'ibura, but the outskirts of the city, hainu pagam nichnas pagam yotze, let's say you have a city where the borders are uneven, so they would draw a kind of even border, shal oso'ir, that's generally around 70 amos outside of the city, that's considered the ibura shalir, that is considered the city, and it is prohibited, it's part of the neder. And the Mishnah continues, Aval hanoder min habayis, but if a person takes a neder, let's say not to enter a particular house, asr min ha'agaf v'lifnim, then the prohibition is from the door frame and inward, that is considered the house, but if you're outside of the door frame, then that is not considered the house. The reason why the Mishnah says avol is because even though it's prohibited to enter into the outskirts of the city, so you might think the outskirts of the house, so to speak, are also asr, so the Mishnah is saying no, it's only asr from the door frame and within. And the Gemara says, Minalon di ibura de masa kemasa dami. From where do we know that the outskirts of the city is considered like the city itself? Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, the Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, Vayhi biyos Yehoshua b'Yericho v'gomer. It says when Yehoshua was in Yericho. My b'Yericho. What does that pasuk mean when it says Yehoshua was in Yericho? Ilema b'Yericho mamish. If you say it means that he was mamish in the city of Yericho, that was impossible at that point in time. But the pasuk also says v'Yericho sogeres u'mesugeres. Yericho was completely enclosed. It would have been impossible for Yehoshua to actually be in Yericho. So you see what it meant was Yehoshua was within the outskirts of the city of Yericho, and that was considered like Yericho itself. The Gemara says, well, why don't we say that he was even in the Tchum of Yericho? Who says he was just in the outskirts? Maybe even the Tchum of Yericho is considered like Yericho itself. And to that, the Gemara says, Haksiv, there's another pasuk which says, B'tchum, when it comes to the Tchum, it says, Umadosem michutz la'ir. It says you measure this Tchum, and that is outside of the city. You see from the pasuk itself, the Tchum is considered outside of the city, so clearly it's just the Ibura Shalir, the outskirts of the city, that is considered within the city. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Hanoder min abayis, if someone takes a neder not to enter a particular house, Eino aser ela min ha'agaf v'lifnim. It's only aser from the door frame and inwards. And the Gemara says, Aval min ha'agaf v'lechutz, but from outside of the door frame, let's say you're still on the threshold of the door, you're still under the lintel of the door, lo, so apparently that's not considered part of the house, and that's not considered part of the neder, it's not prohibited. And so the Gemara says, Meisiv Rav Mari asked the following question. It says by tsaras habayis, by the leprosy that afflicts the house, it says in the pasuk v'yotza kohen min habayis, that the kohen leaves the house in order to close up the house. And so the Gemara says, Yachol yelech lebeso v'yasker. I might think that the kohen's allowed to go to his house and have a messenger close up the house. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, El Pesach habayis. No, he has to be by the entrance of the house. El Pesach habayis. Now, if it just said by the entrance of the house, Yachol yamo tachas hamashkof, maybe he could stand under the lintel, v'yasker, and close it up from there. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, min habayis, he has to go from the house. At sheyotza min habayis kulu, he has to leave the house entirely. Haketzat hauso omid b'tzad hamashkof v'yasker, he has to stand at the side of the lintel, meaning he has to be right outside the threshold of the house, and from there he closes up the house. Now, how do we know that if he does go to his house and close it up, let's say, with an agent, or let's say he's under the lintel and he closes it up, how do we know that that is halachically considered as if he closed it up? The pasuk says you close it up, any way that it's done is going to be considered effective, even though it's best to be right outside the threshold, but if you do it in another fashion, it is still going to work. In any case, what do you see over here? You see that when you're under the lintel of the house, when you're at the threshold of the house, on the threshold, so that's still considered to be part of the house. It's not considered that you've left the house until you've completely left the area of the doorway. And again, that contradicts our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says that if you're outside of the door frame at all, then you're outside of the house. And so the Gemara answers, Shani gabe bayis, it's different by the house, Dechsiv min habayis. What the Gemara means is it's different by the house when it comes to tsaras, because it actually uses the phrase min habayis, at sheyotza min habayis kulo. That implies he has to completely leave the house, meaning even leave the threshold of the house, but that's not true when it comes to Nedarim. When it comes to Nedarim, as long as he's outside of the door frame of the house, that is sufficient. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph.